absolutely wild as Verne Gagne's all-star wrestling goes coast to coast and continent to continent. The greatest wrestlers in the world.
He may be an apprentice carpenter, but I guarantee you he is a seasoned ring veteran.
I've been hit with bar stools, bar rags, barmaids.
I'm talking to you.
They're scared that Hulkamania's still running wild. Oh, yeah. I got a big fat wife and 9 kids at home, and I gotta feed them.
And take a look at Jesse the Body in real life.
Open your hand once, if you would.
You want to see it?
This is absolutely unbelievable. Totally, completely out of control.
He's coming in over the top. Hey! Look out!
Welcome in, you mickheads. AWA Unleashed, the preeminent #1 podcast. So I'm putting up one finger. One finger, because we're #1. Preeminent podcast. AWA. Needless, I don't need to say anymore. Polish Joe, don't need to say anymore. Seasoned microphone veteran. You guys and your silly names.
Wait, hold it. Our silly name says the guy that says AKA #1 Mickhead.
Yeah, but I'm the #1 Mickhead, which
But
means I'm the top.
Yes, you are indeed #1, Chris. I will give you that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
It's
So
an itchy Monday morning, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So are you guys ready to not take a stroll, but you guys ready to frolic down memory lane?
We're gonna frolic. We're gonna fun and frolic. We're gonna have a frivolous time. We're going
Frivolous. Frivolous.
Well, that's
That's not a good word that starts with the letter F.
Well, I think it describes this show perfectly. Frivolous, and also F for the one fan that just tuned out. So that's pretty much.
Join our only fan at AWA Unleashed.
Yeah, that is terrific. That gives new meaning to the OnlyFans concept.
That's right.
Going at this pace, I think F could stand for final.
Okay.
How about freaking dumb? Okay.
There we go. Yeah. Let's get right into the
shilling.
The shilling.
All right. Well, fast forward to about the 3-minute and 16-second mark in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, you guys. First of all, you know what we need to do. We got to tell you about our pinfall level. It's a lot of fun. You get our monthly watch along. You get the welcome letter in the package from me. You get our exclusive interviews, which, by the way, we just did one with ODB Jesse Kriza. So that's going to be dropping a little bit, probably next week and a half or so. And then we've also got the one with Les Thatcher that we just did almost 2 hours. And you can hear I never knew that Les Thatcher, Gerald Briscoe, and Rod Stewart would have something in common. If you want to find out, there it is on the Patreon. So we highly, highly recommend it. It's another way to support, not your favorite podcasters, but it's a way to support us. And then #2, tpublic.com/user/unleashed plus. You get your Slick Mick merchandise. That's so perfect. I didn't hit my mark, but I really wasn't paying attention. So
that's quite all right. I know you've gone through the crowd and punched a lot of marks over the years. So
I have.
You've
the Mizark.
There you go. You've hit your quota.
I have
so
hit my...
let's talk old school wrestling.
Yeah, let's do it. This is another one of those where these are fun because you guys are the ones that ultimately program the show on these weeks with our no DQ&A. So we've got a ton of them since we haven't done some in a while. So did you want to ask these, Joe, or should I do it? Because I mean, some of these are for you. Well, you know what? Why don't I ask? Because you guys have the answers. Because I don't know anything.
Well, you were half right, and it wasn't about you. We have the answers, but we just don't know the questions.
We have can answer. Whether it's right or not is up for debate.
Well, raise the stakes here.
Yeah, well, facts don't care about your feelings, guys. Okay, number 1 from Kevin Mickelson. He wants to know, as a longtime listener, I have to say my favorite episode was the one you guys did with Jim Brunzell. Just great. I think you're referencing having him on the show again. Any possibility?
Wow. Well, it'd be great to have Jim on the show again, and I think he would. I think he'd be more than willing to. Jim has
Would he
always
jump at it?
I see what you did there. I see what you did. It's why you make the 6-figure salary. But there's a photograph of Jumpin' Jim putting the abdominal stretch on one Mr. Bockwinkel. I would love to get Jim back on the show. I mean, he was as honest and forthcoming as any guest that we've had. He's got a lot of stories yet. Just a great guy. So yeah, we'll work on getting Jumpin' Jim back in the saddle. One of our highest viewed shows, by the way, and deservedly so.
Yeah, I wasn't around for the first one, so it'd be great to get Brunsey on. I got some questions for him myself.
Yeah,
and I mean,
go ahead, Chris.
I was just gonna say, like, I mean, I email with him and text with him, so I mean, I could send him another message, just work around whatever schedule that he's got. But I know that, I mean, if he's got the time, then I know that he'll definitely give us a couple more hours. So yeah, I'm down for it. All I need to do is send the man a message. So I will get on that. I know that we've got a few other things that we're waiting on as well. This is for both of you guys from Jerry Segal. He says, I think one of the best AWA tag teams that gets lost in the shuffle was the original Midnight Express with Paul Heyman. What was it like working with those two?
Joe, you and I had the opportunity, at the Showboat and of course at Whitewater, to work with the original Midnight Express, Dennis Condrey, of course, and Randy Rose, along with Paul Heyman. I loved it. First of all, I thought Condrey and Rose were terrific guys. Got along with them very well. And Paul E. was really just starting to feel his oats in the wrestling business. Former AWA tag team champions, of course. And yeah, in the scheme of things, in the AWA, towards the end of the run for the promotion there, I think they were definitely a shining light.
Well, not only near the end of the run for the promotion, but admittedly, it was near the end of the run for the original Midnight Express.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they were still not on or near the top of their game, because they were, but they had been there, done that, gone around the horn several times. But as far as working with them, in particular for Rhodes and Condrey, professional, polite. They weren't dicks. And I'll say the same thing for Paulie dangerously. But what I'll say about Paul, what you see on camera is sort of an extension of, it's not, and not saying in real life, Paul Heyman was nothing but nice, friendly, cordial to me, always asking how his interviews went and so forth. Paul has the gift of gab, and not just when he has a microphone in front of him. You put all three of them together, and yeah, I can see what you're talking about. They sort of get lost in the shuffle. But a lot of wrestlers got lost in the shuffle during the end of the AWA run. They were not around here for very long, maybe a yearish.
Maybe, yeah.
But there's a reason for that, because the AWA was going nowhere. And so why continue to work? But they utilized them as well as they could while they were here. Put the straps on them, for Pete's sake, whoever the hell Pete is. And they were champs. So I don't know that they got lost in the shuffle as much as they were here for a pot of coffee rather than just a cup of coffee.
And remember Randy Rose last year at Cauliflower, I mentioned to him the Whitewater taping. and he remembered it very well. And he said, "Is that the one where the guy was dressed up as a nun sitting in the front row?" 38 years later,
And
this
how
is
many
what.
and how many matches had he done in his career, and he remembers a nun in the front row?
That's a legacy right there.
Yeah.
Oh, that taping makes me so proud of both of you. Both of you.
Yeah.
From Scott LeBeau, he says, "Thanks for the weekly trip down memory lane, guys." Thanks for that, Scott. Love the show. Appreciate that, my dude. It takes me back to my teenage years. This question is, what was the relationship like between Verne Gagne and Bobby Heenan?
Well documented. It was a great relationship. When everybody was going to WWF at the time, Bobby went as well, but he fulfilled his dates. And I think even more, there they are. There's the brain of the boss. And that I believe would be a Cauliflower Alley picture, I'm guessing.
I think that was actually Verne's induction into the WWE.
Oh, you're right. You are correct, sir.
WWE, sorry.
The thing about Bobby Heenan, when everybody's bashing the AWA and Verne, Bobby never did. You know, Bobby would always say in all the shoot interviews, why dislike Verne Gagne? All he wanted you to do was be professional and show up for work. He was a good payoff guy, and he gets a bad rap. So kudos to Bobby Heenan. You know, it's nice relationship they had.
Yeah. Respect and loyalty is what I will, the two words I'll put towards or as the relationship was. Verne never had a bad word about Bobby. In fact, he respected Bobby's fulfilling his obligation, which is all Verne, well, I shouldn't say all Verne wanted, but in the end, you got to, in the game of give and take in this life, especially when it comes to work, Bobby did what he said he was going to do. He fulfilled his obligations. He talked to Verne and told him, and Verne respected that. The office did, even Greg. They respected what Bobby did and how he left the AWA, unlike many others who just took off.
It seems like Bobby Heenan, not only do I think the three of us consider him the best overall performer in the history of the business, but you hear all of these stories after the fact. And I think it's just harder and harder for me to see if there's anybody that's a better individual as a person than Bobby Heenan. It just in terms of how he approached the business and how he was respectful of Verne Gagne before moving on. It just, you hear more and more, and it just makes me sad that he's not here to get his flowers for, I think, maybe what we're all realizing about him. Unfortunately, a lot of this posthumously.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bobby Heenan, if you listen to those shoot interviews, Bobby is a genuine guy. You know, I mean, he'll just talk conversationally with you, or did, and explain the business, explained why he did what he did at the time. No pretense. He is absolutely the GOAT.
Couldn't have said it better, without question. The one thing I will add is a reminder, I guess, for all of us. Trying to think of the right way to say it. Don't wait to tell somebody how much you appreciate them in a very strange way. Treat them as if you're eulogizing them, because there's a difference. You know, you know, we give each other shit on this show, just a little bit, but the reality is we're all going to be gone someday. So say those kind words while you can, while both parties are still around. The only exception would be is if you're co-hosts on a podcast called AWA Unleashed, then just give each other shit.
Is there such a thing as that podcast? Because I would love to tune into it.
I've heard two people talk about it.
Okay, there. Oh, much better. Okay, you guys learned your lesson. Sorry.
Funny guy.
Oh no.
Funny guy.
Oh no! I think I just made the shitstorm worse. It's worse than
There
a
we
shark.
go.
It's worse than a Sharknado, a shitstorm from Joe Chupik. Question 4 from Dan Larson, longtime fan here. Thanks for the work you put in. I know it's a labor of love. It absolutely is. Question that maybe Slick Mick knows the answer to. Heard you mention in a previous episode, the time the Twin Cities ran weekly shows, who was the better payoff guy? Eddie Williams in St. Paul or Wally Carbo in Minneapolis? Great question, Dan. I like that question.
Very, very good question. And I think we got picks of both men, I think. Yes, in the 60s and the 50s, the Twin Cities, they did run shows every week. 1 week Minneapolis, 1 week St. Paul. There's promoter Eddie Williams. Eddie was, kind of involved in some charities around the Twin Cities area, Sheriff's Boys Ranch and so forth. And he would put on, benefit shows. Eddie was St. Paul, ran the St. Paul Auditorium and the St. Paul Armory, I believe, at times. Wally Carbo, of course, needless to say. Wally was Wally, and there I love this picture. We've seen her before. Those are the heels of the day. Wally is seated along with from the left, Killer Kowalski, Hans Schmidt, Hans Herman, and Dick the Bruiser. And you can just feel the respect that they had for Wally. As far as who was the better payoff guy, I'm speculating. I don't think Eddie Williams was a payoff guy. I think Eddie Williams booked the building and did some advertising and came on television like a Stanley Blackburn, kind of a figurehead. But the payoffs came from Verne Gagne. The payoffs came from the AWA office in Minneapolis, not Eddie Williams. So to answer the question, there was $1 guy or two.
Yeah, and I don't know what the payoff structure was back in those days. All I can add is that Verne, from my understanding, Verne was one of the better payoffs in the industry. Not going to say he was the best, but many of the boys had said, they're here because Verne paid well.
Absolutely. And another that straightens it out about Verne Gagne too, the misconception. Oh, everybody, no, Verne was a decent payoff guy for a lot of years. That's why your Bachwinkles of the world stuck around for 15, 20 years.
Yep.
And again, you guys, this is our no DQ&A. If you've got a question you want answered, you can DM, but the best way to do it is just email awaunleashedpodcast@gmail.com. You can see that going on the bottom of the screen if you're watching on YouTube. This is a little bit longer one from Jeff Sharkey. It's a two-part question for Polish Joe. Recently, Jerry Saggs was a guest on the WSI podcast, spoke about the Christmas 1986 show in St. Paul where he refereed a few matches, which was a change from what he and Noms were originally planned to do. Now, he says there was a 6-man between Scott Hall, Greg Gagne, and Leon White versus Larry Zbyszko, Super Ninja, and Mr. Saito. Sags said the finish was botched and led to Greg and Leon attacking in post-match because Sags, quote, ruined the match since the idea was to have Scott Hall pinned by Saito. First, Joe, do you remember any aspects of how this match was filmed and treated from a production standpoint? He says this was the era of Gary Ron was around. The style was different than most St. Paul cards. And second, I believe this was shown locally pay-per-view with multiple cameras. It seemed that there was a greater emphasis on getting crowd reactions, but the fans they picked up were hamming it up in Ronald and Nancy Reagan masks or performing as fans, which didn't fit the Rose Summers versus Rockers cage match. Here's one example. Was this a new director? Was this just a direction that missed the mark? Thanks for reading and all the best.
So typically during this time, Mike Shields was the main director for all things AWA. That sort of changed when Al DeRusha came back from the WWF. And let's see, Al came back. It would have been before Wrestle Rock, which was April of '86. Now, I don't remember if it was Al who directed this Christmas show or if it was, and I wish I could remember his name. But the guy that they brought in to try the whole green screen thing, we've talked about before.
The Tommy Jammer era?
Yeah. Although, as I think about it, I don't think Jammer was around in December of '86. So I think it would have been Al directing.
I just like the green screen and Tommy Jammer.
Now that I think about it, that would have been later on. So it would have been Al DeRusha directing it. So that's why you would have gotten a different feel, a different sense of what the AWA had typically done. And I do think it was a closed circuit / pay-per-view type of thing. Quite honestly, a desperate grasp at cash. And by this point, the AWA wasn't what it once was by December of '86. It was starting, even though I've said '87 was still a good year, it had started to slip downhill a little bit. So hope that answered your question, Jeff. It wasn't a new direction. It was just not even a new director, because Al did how many decades prior. It was just a different director for that shoot.
It's interesting too that I would never have thought of this match in a million years, but I recall now I was at that match and I'm watching Jerry Saggs, referee, and I really wasn't that familiar with him, but I'm thinking this guy is lost. He doesn't know exactly what's going on in there. And, to hear that, he got attacked, maybe physically, maybe verbally in the locker room. Now it makes sense. Yeah. Early on, Jerry Saggs.
Yeah. By the way, can you put that picture up of Saggs again real quick?
Yeah. I believe that's the...
And every time I see a picture of him, I'm reminded of that missing front tooth when he bumped himself too much by literally ramming his mouth into the steel ring post at the Showboat Hotel. He was going to get thrown into the turnbuckle. He ran across, jumped over the turnbuckle, like to pretend to take a bump, and hit his top tooth on the top of the steel ring post. So
oh my God.
That's how Jerry Saggs lost that tooth. Anyway, moving on.
I have no idea. And if, by the way, the Rose Summers Rockers, Midnight Rockers, sorry. I better be specific. That's actually our last watch along for Patreon members. So if you're a member of the Patreon, you'll notice some of the comments that are made when the camera pans to those in those masks. So just wanted to put that out there for you guys.
Nice plug. Love it.
Thank you. From Ryan Ellett, he's got a couple of them here. Number one, they said you guys have given a lot of attention to enhancement talent. Jesus Christ, I can't speak. And I'd like to know if these guys generally had the same training as the more established talent. I know there were some full-time workers that just hadn't gotten over or were past their prime, helping to establish the new stars, but gets the impression they were just part-time weekend warriors, so to speak. Surely they wouldn't have all gone through something equivalent to Verne's camp. I'll let you guys talk about that, and then we'll get into some of the others, part two of the question.
That's a great question. No, Verne did not have the only training camp. And Weekend Warriors, I think, is just a great descriptor. The guys coming in from Milwaukee or Chicago, driving in to do TV and maybe occasionally a house show in the Twin Cities area. But there were other training camps, and I can't be specific on the dates, but I know that these are some of the other guys that trained wrestlers that worked for, in and around the upper Midwest AWA territory. One is our good buddy, Tom Rocky Stone. Tom had a hand in some training. And again, these are your alternatives to Verne Gagne's training camp. You want to call it major league training camp, as opposed to the farm system. I don't know. There's a guy, and not the guy in the MEW shirt, Eddie Sharkey, of course, behind Verne, and arguably with some of the guys that he brought into the wrestling business, as important as Verne. Eddie was training a lot of guys to get into the professional wrestling ranks back then. It's interesting. Between Verne and Eddie, I don't know that too many of Eddie's guys back then wound up being enhancement guys or weekend warriors or whatever. Eddie was training guys that got into the business and became stars right away. Whether it's the Jesse Venturas of the world or the Road Warriors or what have you. So, something can be said for that. But I know that there were some other folks in and around the area that actually had training camps. So there's our buddy. There's the Thumper, Frankie DeFalco. Thumper's Gym in, I believe, Waukesha, Wisconsin. Joe, you're very familiar with Frankie as an in-ring competitor and, of course, as a trainer.
Yeah, the whole Weekend Warriors, when that phrase was used, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Mick, but Kenny J, the sod buster, did he not work in landscaping?
He absolutely did. That's where he got the name Sod Buster.
George Scrap Iron Kodowski? Did that
George Scrap Iron Godasky, I mean, that might have been Woodwork Godasky, considering he stole all of Verne's lumber from the training camp and built himself a barn in Amory, Wisconsin. But another guy who brought wrestlers into the business, one of them that he brought in was Bill Crouch. Another one that he trained was former wrestler Don Lemke. That's Caesar Pavon. Caesar with a stomach claw on the rookie Paul Pershman, Playboy Buddy Rose. So you're seeing early 1970s action there. But Caesar, another guy that brought and trained wrestlers into the business.
Yeah, my whole point of bringing up the outside occupations is because those guys were weekend warriors.
Yeah,
they had normal jobs during the week, and they got brought in to get the shit kicked out of them on All-Star Wrestling, and then they went back to work. So it was a weekend fun time. It was not everybody in the business is going to make it.
Right.
I'll leave it there.
And second one here from Ryan. He's asking about wrestlers who were popular in other territories that ended up falling flat in the AWA. But he wants to hear about popular AWA names who weren't able to get much momentum when they tried working outside of the AWA. So keep up the good work.
You know what? I took a look at that question, Chris, and we got some pictures, and it wasn't so much. I think it was when they left the AWA. Where they had kind of run their course in the AWA and then went to other territories, or their careers just kind of fizzled out. And we're going to start with this guy. He got his push in the AWA. He was trained by Verne Gagne. Mr. Zumhoff had an extensive run as a light heavyweight champion here. But when he went to other territories, I remember he went down to Dallas. Not a lot going on in the world-class area. Then he did some jobs for WWF. So once he left the AWA, that was, I think, kind of the end of the spotlight for Buck.
I had even heard one story of Jesse going down to WCCW, or that's what it was called back then. But he went down there, and this is before cable. But Jesse was essentially a glorified jobber at that point. He wasn't put over. In fact, I think he lost a TV match. I could be wrong, but I'm just going by what I remember from back in the day. So yeah, I mean, you go into another promotion, you're not guaranteed success just because you've had it somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. Let's take a look at that next picture, Chris, that you put up there real quickly.
Sorry about that. It closed out. I just need to grab it. Just need to grab it again here. So
no problem at all.
stand by. There it is.
Okie dokie.
Go in order here.
There we go. Evan Johnson. Evan Johnson, tremendous amateur wrestler at the University of Minnesota. Verne brought him into the business. He was a local guy. He had all the trappings of a potential star in the AWA. Did some teaming up with Steve Olszewski here in the Twin Cities area. He kind of came from that Paul Ellering, Steve Olszewski era. He didn't have, I don't think Evan had either the mindset or the gumption for professional wrestling. It was just a different world for him. And when he left the AWA, he did work in other territories. I heard a story, just happened to hear Dr. Tom Pritchard on a shoot interview the other night talking about Evan Johnson wrestling. I believe this was in Texas. And Evan made the mistake of arguing with his opponent for the evening when their match didn't go very well. He blamed it on the opponent, who happened to be Dick Slater. And good God Almighty, this upstart guy from Minnesota with the amateur background tried to test Dick Slater in the locker room. And I'm thinking there are probably still pieces of Evan Johnson in the locker room. But yeah, another guy, started out here in the Twin Cities, big push. When he left, nothing.
Yeah. Next picture. I think we got a couple more on this question, do we not?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. That guy right there, not the bald guy getting slammed, but of course that's Big Chris Taylor. And very few guys that were stars in the AWA came in with as much fanfare as Chris did. They made a point of saying that he signed this lucrative bonus. I guess it was for a couple $100,000. Whether or not you believe that, here nor there. But Chris, not only from a physical standpoint, unfortunately, started to deteriorate, but also when he left the AWA, I'm not even sure he actually left the AWA. I think it was more a situation where he just physically started to deteriorate, and then the star fizzled out, from what I understand.
Well, I mean, he passed away pretty early.
Yeah.
Was he still in his 20s when?
I believe so. Yeah.
And his, I'm just going off of memory. So by the time he was around, I was like 9 or 10 years old. He wasn't exactly great in the ring.
No.
Sort of a big, plotting guy, which what do you expect from somebody, 6'4", 350, 400 pounds. He didn't have the amble dexterity that a Jerry Blackwell had.
Yes.
That way. So he was a monster of a wrestler, but just didn't seem like professional wrestling was really going to make it for him. And sadly, we'll never know because he passed away much too early.
There you go. And they're surrounded by the Funks. This is very, very interesting. He did well as a trainer when he left the AWA area. Kind of worked with Mr. Saito in Japan, training some of the guys. Brad Ringens. And that, to me, is one of the great mysteries of the business. Joe, we've talked about it. I guess it's not a mystery in terms of his promo skills, but Brad Ringens, pound for pound, was one of the strongest guys in wrestling. Had a couple of runs at heavyweight championships. I believe he wrestled Rick Martel. He wrestled Nick Bockwinkel. But Brad, outside of the AWA area as an in-ring competitor, just didn't crash the nugget when he left the AWA.
The worst thing that Verne ever did with Brad Ringans was put a microphone in front of him. And everything that you said about Brad, spot on. He was an incredible amateur wrestler, and that translated extremely well into professional wrestling. An incredible trainer, a great person.
Yeah.
But the magic left when you put a microphone in front of him. Just didn't have it. I still think that was the biggest detriment to his career going someplace. And let's face it, in professional wrestling, you need to have mic skills.
Absolutely.
If you don't, I mean, you can be like an Undertaker with a Paulie Bear. You can be somebody that requires a manager, but then never say anything on camera because you're going to get exposed.
Yeah, and if nothing else, put a manager with the guy.
Well, that's what I would. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, it seemed like based on how good he was and kind of how legit he was, you put him with somebody that could speak for him, and he could just be that badass mercenary who goes in and kicks the shit out of people.
Absolutely. Put Bobby
He
Heenan
doesn't
with
have to
him.
say a word.
No, doesn't have to. Just stand there with his arms folded. He was built like a brick shit house anyway. Put Bobby Heenan out there talking for him. Brad Ringans, he's got an amateur background, but he's also a killer. He's got that killer instinct and yada, yada. But for Brad, it just didn't pan out. But let's, as a trainer, he was tremendous, both in the United States and Japan. Here's a guy again, arguably, Joe, when he left the AWA after he and Jimmy Garvin were tag team champions, never quite reached that level of, stardom again. That's Steve Regal.
Yeah, this one perplexes me a little bit because I thought he was so damn good. How and why that didn't translate over into other territories, who's to know? They may have used him differently or wrongly, but Steve was incredible, and pairing him, maybe it was the pairing with Garvin that elevated him, and he just was not able to use that in another territory. That one I'll never know. Very curious.
And I remember seeing Steve on WWF TV as an enhancement guy, and it's like, oh, come on, are you kidding? This guy's got all the talent in the world. Doesn't necessarily translate, depending on the territory you're in. Yeah. Now, here's a guy, Laurent Soucy, another tremendous amateur wrestler. Sad to say, Verne tried to give him a push. As far as he got in the push is when Bobby Heenan made fun of his name, Laurent, on television and said, you imagine his parents, you got 9 months to come up with a name and you come up with Laurent. So Bobby was not exactly complimentary. But again, I remember him doing some enhancement stuff after he left the AWA. His name was out there. But bam, I mean, he's in and out of the business. And I think he's a full-time beekeeper, the last I heard, in the Wisconsin area. So again, you get that push in one territory. You got the amateur background, which Verne loved. It's not necessarily going to translate into success someplace else.
Much like an NFL draft, just because a guy appears to have all of the talent in the world at the draft, once you get that spotlight on them in the show, a lot of them just don't have it.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of these guys that we just explained. That's that scenario. They become the Achilles Smiths of the world.
Well, yeah, and a guy like Laurent Soucy, Evan Johnson, if you don't have the mindset for pro wrestling, it is a fucking grind, and it is not all glitz and glamour. And if you're not ready, you're not going to last long.
Yep.
This is from Stan Mitchell, says he loves the show. Thank you, Stan. Says he grew up in the Kansas City area, Bob Geigel Promotions, and doesn't think that you guys give Bulldog Bob Brown nearly enough credit. He wasn't the flashiest wrestler. Certainly when he wrestled Bob at Wrestle Rock, it wasn't his finest moment. but he had a really great career, all things considered. And I'm going to add, you put some respect on that name.
I don't disagree at all. And we have fun at the expense of Bulldog Bob Brown because of his match with Baba. One of the worst matches I've ever seen. But you hit a great point. When Bob was in the Kansas City area, he was a tag team champion. He was kind of the co-booker with Bob Geigel, who owned the territory. He teamed up with Marty Jannetty, of all people, when Marty first started getting into the business. Needless to say, and you can look at Bob Brown right in that picture, and you know this guy's not going to be doing hurricane ranas and flippy flops. Bob was about 5'8" on a good day. He was built like a fire hydrant. He was a straight ahead, no nonsense brawler kind of a guy. And, I've talked about his matches with Bruiser Brody up in Canada. Bob was a steady hand. He truly was. And of course, he wrestled as Bill Green at one point here in the AWA area early on in his career, and then changed colors, became Bob Brown for Wrestle Rock. A great hand, a steady hand, but sad to say, on the worldwide stage with Wrestle Rock, putting him in the ring with Baba was a colossal mistake.
Well, I'll fall short of saying it was a worldwide stage, but it was the biggest stage for the AWA. And
I thank you, Joe. I knew you were going to come up with something.
Yeah, I had to throw that in there. But as far as Bulldog Bob Brown goes, without question, he deserves a lot of kudos for his career. He was great. And I think even when we've watched or discussed that match with Giant Baba, that we have added that Bulldog Bob Brown was a fantastic wrestler. Excuse me. It just so happens, hey, I'll put it this way. Even Michael Jordan only scored a few points in a basketball game before. The reality is, if you take a look at his entire body of work, Bulldog Bob Brown was fantastic. If you take a look at that one match, it was the drizzling shits. Plain and simple.
Yeah, it certainly was. And just a quick story about Bob Brown up in Winnipeg. He's going to wrestle Bruiser Brody in the main event. And George Shire and I are doing backstage interviews. And one is going to take Bob Brown and one is going to take Bruiser Brody. George let me make the call. Let me take the pick. Do I want to interview Brown or Brody? Well, duh. I interviewed Bruiser Brody, and poor George wound up interviewing Bob Brown. And the thing about the interview, Bob Brown stood about yay far away from George. And Bob had this tendency to salivate as he's doing interviews. And I'm telling you, George looked like he just got out of the shower at the YMCA. By the time the interview was over, he's got spit out his glasses, and so George has
it's
never
raining
let
in
me.
Winnipeg.
Oh, yeah, it's raining in Winnipeg. I gotta call you back. There's no question about it, and George has not let me forget that over the years. But who am I gonna pick, Bob Brown or Bruiser Brody? But poor George, that was an experience.
Love it.
Always go first. We've got a couple here from Jade Palisgard, who's a pinfall member from Poughkeepsie, New York. Thank you, Jade. Wanted to start off by saying hello to all of you. Hope you are well. We're doing the show, so we enjoyed it. Watched the Les Thatcher episode. Loved it. 2 questions. Collector and a fan of wrestling since 1980, born in 76. Yeah, Gen Xers, let's go. And notice the action figures in the background sometimes. Could you talk about the AWA figures past and current? Love to hear more about that. I don't think that we've had a show about that, but I know, Joe, that with you being involved in Powertown, I know that we've kicked around the idea of kind of talking about some of those old school wrestling figures.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if you're referring to like there we go. That's easier said than done.
I
But,
know, right? Yeah, shit ain't so easy.
yeah. But those are Power Town figures, and Power Town was launched by the original creator of the wrestling figure genre, and that was the Remcos back in the early, or actually would have been about the mid 1980s. I think those came out in about 1984 is when they started. Chris, you've asked for it. I mean, we can certainly have an episode talking about wrestling collectibles and wrestling action figures. And
I think that'd be great. Like, Jade, I think that's kind of because I think back to kind of like the old basic blocky, wrestling figures, but they're just so iconic because they're a part of the childhood. And I miss those. I miss those. Like, you guys do a hell of a job with yours. They're just so lifelike. And these were just like, I don't know, like you could destroy these things and they wouldn't, take a lick and keep on ticking.
So there's two different versions. We have the Ultras at Power Town, but we also have reintroduced the Remcos. In fact, the very first series of them will be finally shipped this month. And then moving forward, I'll say this about Power Town. Moving forward, some issues have been resolved. And moving forward, I'll just leave it this way. The access to the latest line is going to be much, much quicker. So how's that for a tease? But yeah, we'll get Steve Rosenthal, who is the guy behind the original Remco series. We'll get him on this podcast, and
I would love that.
Yeah, I would say give it about a month or so, and we'll have Steve on the podcast.
Joe and Chris, those original AWA Remco figures are so classic.
Mm-hmm,
First of all, you have to, with some of their faces, it's kind of a stretch. Who is this guy?
So they look like after getting stretched.
Yeah, absolutely. And even more so, of course, was the bodies. The bodies were all the same. So Buddy Rose would have the same physique as Greg Gagne, which was very interesting.
And Lean 217, right?
The Lean Mean 217. Greg only outweighed him by a pound. Can you imagine that? Spit take. But I will never forget, I had Buddy Rose's daughter, Alexia Pershman, on SNR, and she had a Buddy Rose doll with her. And I made a comment about the physique. I said, the physique, it's not. And she said, in essence, listen, my dad was kind of the prototype for these dolls. The original physique was his, and every doll that came up afterward was based on the Buddy Rose physique. Well, come on. I mean, Buddy, I think won the most abs competition in Portland several times, but it's just classic. And God, have wrestling figures come a long way. I mean, the way they look facially is just extraordinary. So that'll be a good show.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
And then the
Chris froze.
Oh, there he is. There he is. He's back.
Jade was just wondering. That's what happened when I tried to bring up the Word doc. Just going to go off of memory. Wondering if we could do a show about attire, and all the gimmicks, which is, by the way, a word that has been attributed to you, Joe. But just to, the robes and the boots, and just kind of do a show about the outfits and all the gimmicks that the talent would bring to the ring.
First of all, you're being too kind to Joe. Give the difference to Al DeRusha.
That's where I got
DeRusha's middle name was Gimmick. Yep. Alvin J. Gimmick DeRusha. No question about it. Nobody calls a jar of Parmesan cheese a gimmick, a spaghetti gimmick. Come on. But Al DeRusha did. As far as the question, I think was talking also about who makes the clothes for the guys or who did, and that type of thing. I know that Ric Flair had his wardrobe, his robes custom made. He had a lady that did it for him. I don't know if she made robes for other people. I believe she did. There was a company out of Ohio, K&H Wrestling Gear. Carl and Hildegard. They were a They were a spousal couple in Ohio who made a lot of the wrestling gear for the wrestlers back in the 70s and the 80s. Yeah, and a lot of the guys, of course, have stuff custom made. What I would say, and Joe, Chris, do we have a photograph to go along with this question?
I didn't see one. No.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got one for the next one, which is very gimmicky. But that's for the next question.
Okay, so there you go. But in some of the robes, I know Flair's robes cost thousands of dollars. I mean, they really are classic. You go to the Waterloo Hall of Fame and you see some of these robes on display, the ornate robes, and just fantastic stuff. K&H Wrestling Gear, Carl and Hildegard of Ohio. There you go.
Any relation to Dennis?
No, that was Dennis Hilgard.
Gotcha.
Hildegard. How much do you weigh? It's
Hildegard. That would be an interesting name,
wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Hey, the next one is from Gloria Ann Peterson. Says she comes from 3 generations of wrestling fans. Used to watch the AEW every week on TV. So much better than what we see today. Said her late grandpa said Gorgeous George was really the first flamboyant character. Did he ever wrestle in the AWA?
He wrestled in the Minneapolis territory prior to it being the AWA. So once the AWA got started, I believe George, and what a great shot this is. That's a Gorgeous George with Jack Benny, the late great comedian. George was one of these guys who, predated Hulk Hogan as far as being a crossover. Entered the entertainment world, and kind of became a mainstream guy. And Gorgeous George Wagner was just like your average wrestler, nothing special. And then he decided to dye his hair blonde and come to the ring with his Georgie pins, bobby pins that he threw to the crowd. He came to the ring with a valet. So he was probably the first really flamboyant guy that got any notoriety in the business. You could see Georgie's on YouTube all over the place all these years later. I think he retired in about 1963, sad to say, squandered all his money. He did not have a penny left when he passed, but back in the day, yeah, he was mainstream stuff, Gorgeous George.
Yeah, he passed away rather young as well. He was before my time, but from what I have gathered from the old guys, from the Ray Stevens and Wahoos and Vernes of the world, was what you just said, Mick, where he really wasn't a great wrestler. But, and this sort of goes along with what I talked about earlier about Brad Rheingans, where Brad could wrestle and not work the mic. It was the exact opposite for Gorgeous George. The story goes that Verne Gagne was the first professional wrestler to earn $100,000 in a year. This is going back in the 1950s, and that was a shit ton of money.
Oh, yeah.
But Gorgeous George really was the first wrestler to transcend professional wrestling and cross over into mainstream because of his flamboyance in his gimmick. I'll say it, he really sort of sucked as a professional wrestler. He really did. But the gimmick got over. So kudos to him for doing that and making whatever money he could off of it. Sadly, yeah, he did piss away all of his money. But Gorgeous George, still to this day, a legend.
Absolutely.
A legend.
Absolutely.
a legend as a gimmick, maybe not so much as a wrestler.
Iconic, and Muhammad Ali credits Gorgeous George for his interview style. So that's really saying something as well.
Yep, he was a trailblazer, big time.
Yeah, I 100% agree with both you guys. Next one is from Terrence Brown. He says, our show is a highlight of his week. Thank you, Terrence. Appreciate that. Question is about Ray Stevens. Do you guys think he would have made a good AWA champion?
Well, he was.
Yeah, I think he's probably referring to singles champion. Ray was put into that tag team situation with Nick kind of early on when he first came in. He debuted, and they already were establishing the connection with Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens. So Ray in the AWA, oh, look at that. Oh, and Ray is viewing Alcatraz, and it's amazing with the lifestyle that Ray led, that he wasn't, shooting from the inside out.
That's a great picture. I really like that picture. Like, that's a good picture.
That exemplifies Ray Stevens. Don't forget, the guy rode a, bike and a motorcycle without a stitch of clothing on too. So, that's Ray Stevens.
More than once.
So Ray and Nick, of course, had a tag team championship for a long time, and then Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson in the AWA. So Ray was kind of in that championship run as a tag team. Would he have made a good singles champion? Absolutely. I think when he split from Nick Bockwinkel, when they did that angle on television, I think Ray would have been a good champion, at least in the short run. He was a champion everywhere he went. And the guys who knew Ray Stevens, there are a lot of them that will say he was the greatest wrestler that ever lived.
And in his own words, he was a trucker, a fighter, and a wild bull rider. As far as Ray becoming world champion here in the AWA, think of the time that when he was here. He had Nick Bockwinkel and Verne Gagne standing in his way. He was a heel. When he came into the AWA as a heel, there's a heel champion in Nick Bockwinkel. And so how do you put him on top? And then when the boss, Verne Gagne, is there, how is he going to put Ray over after Nick being put over for all of his time? It wasn't meant to be for Ray as far as being a world champion, a singles world champion here in the AWA. But he was the next best thing. And it was a tag team champion with Nick Bockwinkel.
And I mean, part of the Heenan family. So, I mean, that's, to me, Ray Stevens, Pat Patterson, like Ray Stevens is a lot of different things. He might have made a great champion, but I mean, based on what I can see in his spot, like, I think he was booked perfectly considering where he was at. But that's just me looking at it, when I didn't get a chance to see it live.
Everywhere he went, Chris, he was on top. And if this guy isn't in every fucking Hall of Fame that there is, it's a travesty. I mean, Ray was just above and beyond.
Yeah,
great wrestler.
I do have to correct myself. I think it was Verne had the belt when Ray first came into the territory.
Yes.
So I want to, just correct that. But my position still stands. You've got Verne up on top when Ray comes here. You got Nick Bockwinkel waiting in the wings. You've got Billy Robinson here. I mean, what a stable of talent to choose from to begin with.
Joe, you had superstar Billy Graham. Yeah. You had the Baron. You had everybody. Ivan Koloff. I mean, my God, it was a loaded territory.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Got a couple more here, guys. From the Bandit, Bob Stollard says it seemed like as good as Dick the Bruiser promoter? Was. Yeah, I don't know. As good as Dick the Bruiser was, he played second fiddle to the Crusher in the AWA. I'd like to know your thoughts.
In the AWA, Bruiser was kind of the sidekick to Crusher. Allegedly they were cousins. AWA tag team champions, of course. Boy, if that isn't a professional wrestler. Look at that mug on Dick the Bruiser. In the AWA, he was secondary to Crusher because Crusher had such a legacy here. But You go to Chicago, you go to Indianapolis, you go to that territory, and it was the opposite. I mean, Crusher was over, but Bruiser was the guy, especially in the Indianapolis territory.
Well, and keep in mind that because Bruiser did have his own territory, that Crusher was here more often than Dick the Bruiser. Maybe not so much in the 60s, but by the time I started watching in the 70s, Dick the Bruiser was, I think he came around about as much as the women wrestlers and the midgets back in the time. So he didn't have as much exposure, as much of a presence as Crusher had here, at least for the length of time. So I think that was a part of it. But no doubt, Dick the Bruiser was huge wherever he did go.
Absolutely. And again, we're not going to denigrate Dick the Bruiser. You know, on the main stage, arguably he was over every bit as much as the Crusher. In the AWA, not quite so much.
Hey, Mick, quick side question. So Dick the Bruiser had the real raspy voice. He did play, if I'm not mistaken, for the Chicago Bears, or was it the Green Bay Packers?
It was the Packers.
Okay, he played for the Packers. And I believe it was during his time playing football that he got hit in the throat. And that damaged his larynx and his voice for the rest of his career. So that's why he sounded so gravelly. It wasn't intentional. That's just the way he talked. Is that correct? Is that your
that is correct. And of all things, ironically, when Bruiser died, when he passed, he was lifting weights. He was doing bench presses and too much weight, I guess, on the bar at the time, and he burst his esophagus. And that's the way that Dick the Bruiser went out. I guess there's something poetic about that. He went out as a tough guy. But yeah, you're correct, Joe, from what I understand about the voice.
Gotcha. All right. What do we have next?
Well, I think we've got the last one. Are we just we down to the very last one here, guys?
I believe you are correct.
Okay, so this is from Doug Oswald. And again, if you've got a question, you can email awaunleashedpodcast@gmail.com. It's probably the best way. So that way I can copy it and put it into the doc. Love the show about the PWA and Eddie Sharkey. Never missed a show back at George's and Fridley's. Such tremendous talent and a hot atmosphere. Question for you, Slick Mick. A lot of the guys came to the ring with a valet. SNR was such a hit that they expected you to as well. Were there any ladies you would have chosen to accompany you to the broadcast booth? Maybe a precursor to the Mickheads.
Well, here's the deal on that. Were there ladies that I would have chosen? Yes. Let's just say that the lineup or the line to become my valet wasn't exactly, two by two, not even single file. But I actually recruited, this is a little known fact, I actually recruited a couple of ladies that were interested in accompanying me to the broadcast booth, probably arm in arm. And it was such a heated competition that they actually went out behind George's and Fridley and got into a fight to see who would be Slick Mick's valet, manageress, whatever you want to call it. So, Chris, have we got the photograph of those two divas that went out back
We do, yeah.
At Roper's in Fridley? Do we have that there? There they are. I'm not sure who that referee is, and I don't know where they got my shorts to get into that brawl. But yeah, there they are, and Joe, no, one of them is not Wanda.
Well, that's Wanda's little sisters, I think.
I think so. The Wanda's baby sisters, but these two, and I forget what their names were. And I don't want to fat shame anybody, but these two. They went out back, and I believe they hit each other simultaneously with left hooks, and both went down for the count. It kind of looked like a mountain range when they were laying there. But yeah, and you can see back then there wasn't a lot of traffic on out in Fridley there, at George's. But yeah, those were the two that were the finalists, and actually the only signees to be a Slick Mick valet.
The interesting part about that photo, can you put that back up, Chris?
Oh, gladly. Gladly.
No, hey, we present the facts here.
This is wrestling
You gotta
history,
always
you
be
guys.
right. So I'm noticing the ring ropes are probably too thin, so that's why they had to go with the boxing gloves on, because there's not going to be going off of the ropes on this. But these gals look familiar. I think their nicknames were Bump and Slam. I remember these two. They took up the front row at the old St. Paul Auditorium next to Frankie. Frankie was right in the middle, and they sort of, dispersed themselves and took up that entire first row. And
So you say it was like a Frankie sandwich then? Is that what you're saying?
it was. And Mick, how you didn't have them come out with you
I know.
in Vegas, if you would have had them come out on that fateful night where you screwed up and called the Midnight Rockers the Rockers, you would have had an incredibly even better career than you already have had. It was your fault for not having Bump and Slam escort you to the announce table.
Couple of things, wise ass. Number one, thank you for telling me their names. I did not know that they were Bump and
Great
Slam.
booking idea, Joe. Great.
Yeah, great, tremendous booking idea, you shithead. But here's what I would say: when Bump and Slam would buy their tickets to an arena, they always bought them early. Thus, the promotion already had a sellout. In the arena, all the seats were gone before the rest of the tickets went on sale.
Well, I'm impressed because isn't it normally run, don't walk? Well, there's no running or walking. I mean, how would they have gotten to the box office? We will wobble, but they don't fall down?
No. And actually, I did. There's another little known fact. Bump and Slam, they actually tore those two down at the end of their career, and they put up what would eventually become a Kiel Auditorium in St. Louis at the site of the demise of Bump and Slam.
I'm wondering if they each only weighed 217 pounds.
Each leg.
No.
All right.
Hey,
Let's
Well, you're not wrong, I guess.
Bump and Slam.
another t-shirt, man. That is the great nickname for the OnlyFan / Bump and Slam.
Bump and Slam. That's perfect. And you know what? They actually worked better than Silo Sam and Rocky Mountain Thunder.
Well, that's easy to do when the bar is set that damn low.
That about it for this week, Chris?
I think so. Let's go ahead and take
Idea
her out.
for the entire podcast.
Yeah, we say that every week, yet here we are. We are. Let's go with some shout outs. Mick, I'm going to let you go first.
My dear friend and lady wrestling great, Velvet McIntyre. Velvet out there in the Pacific Northwest. Sweet lady. We correspond quite often on Facebook Messenger. Politically, we see things quite the same way, which always adds to a pleasant conversation. One of the nicest gals you ever want to meet. Hello, Velvet.
And my shout out goes to, we had seen a picture of him earlier. I picked him. He follows us. He's one of our AWA Unleashed Army members, but I just love the name. Randy Funk, the Funker. The shout outs to you.
Nothing wrong with a funk. Let me say that.
Funky.
And mine's going to go to Justin Clapper. Just had a chance to talk to him about a couple of ideas that I'm going to throw past you guys here when we get off the air. Appreciate the correspondence, Justin. And it's the shout outs are good because hopefully we give you guys a little bit of an opportunity to get your name out there. And hey, we love all the Mick heads.
Both of them.